Hello, Law and Candor listeners. Welcome to the final episode of Season 4 of Law and Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I know everyone's big question right now is, will there be a Season 5? I can only say that Bill and I are heads down in contract negotiations with Lighthouse Management. You know, it's touch and go right now, but we will see. We will try not to disappoint you. We're excited to have as our final guest speaker this season, Sara Lockman of Walmart, to talk about one of our favorite subjects, machine learning, specifically how to take the mystery out of machine learning. But before we have Sara join us, we must talk and we must learn about our final
sightings of radical brilliance.
Of course, this is the section of the show where we bring you the latest news of noteworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius.
Yeah, and today we have something that was on Wired. Again, this is a coronavirus special. This is the title of the article is Coronavirus Contact Tracing Apps Were Meant to Save Us. They won't. So, a pessimistic view of this technology that's coming out. And the first time I heard about these contact tracing apps was when I heard about the collaboration between Google and Apple, not two companies that don't often collaborate together. They're actually creating a system, an operating system that these contact tracing apps can then plug into for their respective phones. And it's interesting, of course, because in the United States, it's going to become a political issue. But if you think about it, it's really amazing. We're using technology. 80% of the world has some sort of a smartphone, right? If you could have that and figure when you test positive that you can actually register, I've tested positive, and here's where I've been, right? Now that the phone has tracked where I've been since I've started feeling ill, that allows the doctors or the medical industry to isolate areas of outbreak, which will ultimately lead to a quicker eradication of the pandemic or epidemic, right? In this case, COVID-19.
Yeah, I was surprised, to see that, there are over 30 different systems that are under development by, governments and health authorities. And it's interesting too that, a lot of these are developed in, countries that, are, much more authoritarian than the US. Maybe people are a little more used to the idea of having all their movements tracked and then, stored and correlated. I agree with Bill. In the US, this is likely to become political. And I think people just kind of have an aversion to this kind of, mass surveillance. And if you kind of think about it on a practical level, like imagine something that's sort of, traced all your steps of the week. You've crossed paths with someone who is now, COVID-19 positive, and like what, it's going to send you a notification to go home and, self-isolate for 14 days. It just seems, like cool technology that might not actually work in the real world.
I also got to say the privacy aspect of this is much ado about nothing to me. The only difference between this and every other app on your phone is you're letting the phone know that you have COVID, because otherwise they know exactly where you are. Do you think it's any mistake that when you walk by your favorite coffee shop that a coupon pops up on your phone, or your Starbucks app all of a sudden opens up? I mean, they know where you are at all times. So to say all of a sudden that these apps and this system is going to invade your privacy, it's anonymized in terms of who has COVID. You're not giving up your medical information as what diseases you have. It's just letting the network know that someone has COVID who is here, and then they could trace that. Listen, if to me, there's things to get upset about with regard to privacy intrusions with technology, and then there's, hey, they're doing it anyway in this particular circumstance. If everybody just registered whether or not they had COVID, you'd be able to develop a heat map. You'd be able to open the country a lot more quickly and a lot more intelligently, rather than just haphazardly saying, okay, we're open today, but we're in no better position than we were 2 months ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think people are kind of used to the idea that, they're tracked by their devices. I just think it kind of falls apart a little bit on the, now I'm going to get a notification that's going to tell me to do something that involves, self-isolating for 14 days because I might have come in contact with someone. I'd like to believe that everyone would follow those instructions. I guess we'll just see.
The apps are going to start opening. They're going to start launching very soon, apparently. So we'll see how they work. And there's going to be a leader. There's going to be one that's endorsed by either a government or by Apple themselves or by Google, and that'll be the one to take off. And it'll be interesting to see if any if any issues arise out of it, or which countries allow it to happen. Again, if it's part of an overall program, an overall strategy to get back to business, you might, in that sort of follow the money line of thinking, you might see it be more successful than if it just becomes a straight up political issue. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'd feel better if this were hey, this person washed their hands app. I think that would be a better innovation for society.
I actually have some people that I would like to have that app on, and that's why I've been bowing instead of shaking hands for years. Anyway, we digress. We're going to introduce our speaker now. We were really lucky to have Sara Lockman of Walmart on to talk about taking the mystery out of machine learning. I really loved where this conversation went when we recorded the podcast. She was fantastic. Answered, just her perspective on it was really interesting. I thought she was a great guest.
Great episode.
Enjoy, guys. All right, so let's move to the interview portion of the podcast. The subject today is taking the mystery out of machine learning, success stories from real life examples, and how data scientists impact eDiscovery. We have a fantastic guest today. It's Sara Lockman from Walmart. Sara, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Can you take just a minute to give us a little background about yourself?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. So I've spent my entire career in eDiscovery in some form or fashion, started in forensic collection work, moved to end-to-end eDiscovery management, and then more into proactive information governance initiatives focused on how we can do more upfront in the EDRM to have some downstream efficiencies. And I started with Walmart about 3 years ago and recently moved to the senior director role over our eDiscovery and information governance program. And that team supports our global portfolio of all investigations and litigations for the whole company. And that's really afforded me the opportunity to work with a lot of case teams around the world. And given our large footprint, both employees and geographies, I've had the experience of dealing with very high volumes of data and a lot of different varieties of ESI.
The experience of dealing with high volumes of data, you make it sound like a good thing. Yeah, maybe Sara, just to level set, especially on machine learning, that word carries a lot of mystery, I think, for a lot of people. What does it mean for you? What is machine learning, especially in this context of eDiscovery?
Yeah, so machine learning, it's a subcategory, I guess you can say, of artificial intelligence. And really, you're leveraging an algorithm to find patterns in data that can then help you organize it and classify it in a way that you hadn't before. And as the name implies, there's the potential for that algorithm to improve or learn over time as you give it more inputs and examples of what you're looking for. And I think most people, when they think of it in the context of eDiscovery, they think about supervised learning or predictive coding, technology-assisted review, but you can also leverage a lot of unsupervised learning as well, like concept clustering, which I know a lot of folks are familiar with, that cluster wheel that exists in a lot of our platforms. But really, machine learning has tons of applications beyond the legal tech space as well.
So tell us about what we try to do here for the listeners is to go through some best practices and challenges for whatever the subject is. And here I would assume that there's quite a bit. Can you give us an idea of some best practices and challenges when you're implementing machine learning as a strategy?
Yeah, so let's start with a couple of the challenges. So I think one of the biggest ones is knowing what the technology can do versus knowing how to practically apply it, which I think are very different things. Really knowing what's in your analytical toolkit and knowing what makes sense for your case. So matching case objectives and needs to the actual tool itself. In the same way, a mechanic would have a hammer in their toolbox, you have to know what you want to build. Where are you going with this? And it's not necessarily always a one-size-fits-all or easy button type of application. So really understanding where you're headed and having people who have practical experience applying it to cases really matters. And another big challenge can be garbage in, garbage out when you're talking about document coding. So if you don't have thoughtful planning up front and get the right subject matter experts and reviewers involved, you're not going to get really useful output downstream. You're going to have issues and you're going to wonder why it didn't apply well to your case. So again, goes back to really understanding the fundamentals of what you're trying to accomplish and not just blindly applying technology because it sounds cool.
Sara, you mentioned, it's really not a one-size-fits-all solution, and I agree with you. When you look at applying machine learning to, say, a litigation versus an investigation, What are some of the differences there, and how do you do that effectively?
Yeah, so on the investigation side, normally you have shorter case life cycles. And so leveraging something like a continuous active learning type workflow is really a great way to front load and get to potentially relevant data faster. And that speed to relevance is really important when you're going down the path of investigations, especially if you're starting with an allegation that's kind of vague. And also your review workflow can be more fluid and exploratory in nature. There's not a lot of pausing and necessarily seeking agreement with opposing sides. You're moving forward. You're trying to get to the facts of the case and move quickly. Obviously not at the expense of quality of the work and thoroughness, but you really just want to try to figure out where you're headed, and you can pivot a lot easier. I've also found that it works so much faster and also more effectively on investigations when you compare it to keywords. So when we've done keywords for investigations, often we find that what was actually relevant when we do like side-by-sides or postmortems on cases really was not going to be identified with the keywords that we had originally selected. And that investigative focus and the documents of interest, especially if you're looking for bad actors, they could be intentionally obfuscating what you're looking for. And so even if you have, a keyword taxonomy or something that you've carefully crafted, it can become obsolete over time. And you really need to be thoughtful about how you're querying your data, how you're looking at that data set. And machine learning is a very effective tool when it comes to investigations.
And what about like on the litigation side? How would you take a different approach there?
So for us, often it comes down to kind of layering in different approaches. So we might start with like unsupervised learning, where we're looking at different clusters and buckets of data to really understand where we want to start. And then we'll start employing, okay, let's layer on both some of the keywords we're looking for and some of the relevant hot docs or information we know, and start to combine that with a machine learning or a categorization type exercise. And it's really iterative, and often with the investigators, it's a very back and forth feedback driven process to get them what they're looking for, especially if they have, interviews or things they're preparing for. We want to be sure we get them what they need and work through the data set. But often I find it's very feedback driven, very iterative.
Let's talk about some of the practical applications that you've seen used in the context of cases, like whether it's for privilege or data reuse, whether directly or indirectly, like, reusing actual work product because it's a duplicate, or learning from cases or from documents that are similar to this document and indirectly using that work product, general analytics. So what are some of the practical applications that you've seen, that you've sort of tried and broke and tried and ultimately were able to successfully deploy?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, continuous active learning workflow is a great application, but then you can use it for portions of your workflow as well. So you just mentioned privilege. That's a really great way to leverage previous work product and use it as a way to quality control a portion of your workflow that can often be very expensive. I also think that looking at it from a prioritization standpoint works really well, especially if you have, an urgent deadline for rolling productions, you need to get something out quickly. You can front load your document set. Even if you don't use it to drive your entire work stream, it can really help you organize and set up a review workflow that's going to be much more effective and help you reach your case goals earlier.
That's interesting, Sarah. Is that, we have a lot of clients, companies like Walmart that, data analytics are just sort of ingrained in so many aspects of what the company does. But sometimes when it comes to legal, it's a little harder to convince people, lawyers specifically, that analytics can actually apply to their world too. How do you sort of tackle that within Walmart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I really think you need to have on your case team a really great eDiscovery technologist who can help demystify the process for your subject matter experts and attorneys, and help them articulate and educate them on what you're doing, and not to be overwhelmed by some of the lingo. I know there's a lot of marketing jargon out there where sometimes it's the same underlying tech, it's just in a different wrapper. And so when you have a good technician that's also a really great project manager, they can combine that technical training with really their practical case experience to help ensure that there's positive outcomes and case learnings from that. And hopefully through that exercise of getting somebody on that case team who can be that educator and that influencer on those cases, then it just perpetuates itself as you work again with those attorneys on future cases.
You mentioned before, like this idea of kind of doing a postmortem where maybe you take like the traditional approach, whether that was keywords, and then, take a more analytical approach and look at those side by side. Is that something too that's been helpful in convincing people?
Yeah, being able to show the difference between their presumed terms of interest and then ultimately what was responsive and show them that delta can be a really powerful case study. And also being able to show them how we can dig into data sets or portions of their document population that they had completely written off as non-responsive, dig through that a little bit, do some sampling or otherwise run some different machine learning capabilities and show them what else is out there. It's definitely interesting when you've had folks that haven't been exposed to these type of workflows at all, really take an interest in them and want to dig deeper with you into some of those findings.
Sara, this has been fantastic, and it's my job to try to recap this. And frankly, I could not type or write fast enough because there were so many good points here. I think for people that are interested in machine learning and analytics generally, I think they're going to love this podcast. I mean, from some of the stuff I took out of it, machine learning, embracing AI, where algorithms start to find patterns in the data that you weren't previously aware of, patterns that you might be able to take action on later. So, sort of intelligence that you can then turn into actionable intelligence. Understanding what tech you have and how to apply it, i.e. like the best tool for the job and matching the capabilities with the needs on a particular case. I agreed that not every piece of technology from, all the tools out in the market are great for every case, but some of the different functionalities are would be great as standalone. With other cases, you might want to apply a different technology. Also, this one I love: garbage in, garbage out. If you're going to learn from past work product or even work product that's currently going on that's training your algorithms, if you're not confident in the decisions that are being made, you're not going to be confident in the output. And also, I think this is interesting, right? When you compare, especially in the context of an internal investigation, you mentioned comparing the results from keywords versus artificial intelligence or machine learning. Oftentimes, you'd be surprised to find out how much more accurate the machine learning and AI is when you take that Pepsi challenge. And frankly, I think that just makes sense. The other thing that you never find with the search terms is what got left behind. How often do you go and analyze that? Oftentimes, what you see is people say, and I was thinking about this when you said it, are these terms, returning documents that we thought they would return, but you never go back and see, looking back in the filtering pool and say, but what did we leave behind? And I think you can do that more with an AI machine learning approach. And then you got into using previous work product to make Priv more efficient, using, whether TAR or continuous active learning to prioritize review, leveraging technology to cut down on the cost of review and ultimately finding the right docs, sampling exercises, and my favorite, having a good technician that's also a great PM is a must-have for the success of the case. I think that, if you have that and a good technology, I would take that over a great technology and a bad PM any day.
Agree.
Yep.
So great. This was a fantastic episode. I loved it. I'm going to go back and listen to it myself because there's a lot of stuff I'm going to use with my clients. I'm not going to cite you because I like to pretend all good ideas are mine. I hope that's okay with you. But this was fantastic. Really, thank you, Sara, for doing this.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Sara. It's been great.